My name is Marjorie Caldwell, but everyone calls me Marge. I'm 71 years old, and until 2 months ago, I thought I knew what family meant. That devastating phone call from my son changed everything. They had no idea what was coming next. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from. Hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories about family betrayal and the justice that follows. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I've lived in Riverside, Ohio my entire adult life. It's a quiet suburban town about 30 minutes outside Columbus, the kind of place where neighbors still wave from their front porches and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. My husband Frank and I bought our house on Maple Grove Drive in 1978, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and a maple tree in the front yard that Frank planted the day we moved in. For 43 years, that house was the center of our universe. We raised our son Derek there, watched him take his first steps on the hardwood floors Frank had refinished himself. We celebrated graduations and birthdays in the dining room, hosted countless Sunday dinners in the kitchen where Frank would carve turkey while telling the same jokes every year. When Frank died of a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, I thought about selling. The house felt enormous without his laughter filling the rooms, without his coffee mug permanently stationed on the kitchen counter. But Derek convinced me to stay. "Mom," he'd said, holding my hands as we sat on the front porch swing Frank had hung 20 years earlier, "this house is our family history. Lily and Mason need their grandmother's house to come home to. We need you here." Derek has always been my pride and joy. At 44, he's everything a mother could want in a son. He works as a regional manager for a logistics company, married his college sweetheart Sienna, and gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren who light up my world. Every Sunday, they'd come for dinner. Lily, now 13 and growing into such a smart young woman, would help me in the kitchen while Mason, 10 and full of energy, would regale us with stories from school. After Frank passed, Derek stepped up in ways that made my heart swell. He'd stop by twice a week to check on me, handle any repairs the house needed, and made sure I wasn't lonely. When my arthritis made yard work difficult, he hired a service without being asked. When I mentioned feeling unsafe after dark, he installed motion sensor lights around the property. "Dad would want me to take care of you," he'd say whenever I tried to protest his help. "You raised me right, Mom. Now let me return the favor." My financial situation was comfortable, thanks to Frank's careful planning. The house had been paid off for 15 years. Frank's life insurance, combined with my modest pension from 30 years teaching elementary school and our Social Security benefits, meant I could live modestly but securely. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't worried about money either. I spent my days volunteering at the local library, tending to my garden, and babysitting Lily and Mason when Derek and Sienna needed help. Life was peaceful, predictable, and filled with the kind of simple joys I'd learned to treasure after losing Frank. Sienna had always been a bit of an enigma to me. Beautiful in that effortless way some women possess, she ran a small interior design business from their home. She was polite, always bringing flowers when they visited, always complimenting my cooking. But there was something calculating in her green eyes that I could never quite identify. Frank had noticed it too, though he'd never said anything directly. "That girl's got sharp edges," he'd once observed while we watched her interact with the children at a family barbecue. "Hope Derek knows how to handle sharp edges." But Derek seemed blissfully happy, and the kids adored both their parents. Who was I to question a marriage that appeared successful? Besides, Sienna never gave me any real reason for concern. She was simply distant. Professional, almost, in the way she interacted with the family. That distance became more pronounced after Frank's funeral. Where Derek grew more attentive, Sienna seemed to pull back. She'd sit quietly during Sunday dinners, contributing little to conversations, often scrolling through her phone while the rest of us talked. When I'd try to engage her about her business or her interests, her responses were polite but brief. "She's processing grief differently," Derek explained when I mentioned her withdrawal. Frank's death hit her harder than she's letting on. She loved him like her own father. I accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it. Grief affects everyone differently, and if Sienna needed space to heal, I would respect that. The important thing was that Derek and the children seemed fine, and our Sunday tradition continued uninterrupted. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have paid more attention to those subtle changes. Should have questioned why Sienna started asking seemingly innocent questions about my finances. About the house value, about Frank's insurance policies, about my monthly expenses. Just want to make sure you're managing okay, Marge, she'd say with what seemed like genuine concern. We worry about you being alone with all these responsibilities. I appreciated what I thought was her growing interest in my well-being. After months of distance, it felt like she was finally trying to build a closer relationship with me. So I answered her questions honestly, even gratefully. It felt good to have someone show interest in the practical aspects of my life. The house is worth about $240,000 according to the latest assessment, I'd told her proudly. Frank was smart about buying in this neighborhood. Values have held steady even through the recession. That's wonderful, she'd replied. What a blessing to have that security. 3 months ago, those conversations became more frequent. Sienna would call independently of Derek, checking on me, asking about my day. Sometimes she'd bring coffee and we'd sit on the front porch while Lily and Mason played in the yard. You've built such a beautiful life here, she'd say, gazing around the property. This house, this neighborhood, the way you've managed everything since Frank passed. You're stronger than you know. Her words felt like the daughter-in-law relationship I'd always hoped for but never quite achieved. Derek seemed pleased that we were bonding, often commenting on how much Sienna enjoyed our talks. She really looks up to you, Mom, he'd tell me. Says you're the strongest woman she knows. I treasured those moments of connection. After feeling like an outsider in Sienna's life for years, it felt wonderful to believe she truly cared about me as more than just Derek's mother. The irony is devastating now, knowing how she was using every conversation to gather information for what was coming next. But at the time, I thought I was living in a season of healing and growing closeness with my family. The house was my sanctuary, my financial security was solid, and my relationships with Derek, Sienna, and the grandchildren seemed stronger than ever. I should have known it was too good to be true. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was in my garden, deadheading the last of the summer roses before the first frost, when my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen, but when I answered, the voice I heard was barely recognizable. Mom? The word came out strangled, desperate in a way that made my blood run cold. Derek? Sweetheart, what's wrong? The sound that followed was unmistakably sobbing. My son, my strong, capable son who hadn't cried in my presence since he was 12 years old, was breaking down on the phone. Mom, can I come over? I need to see you. It's urgent. My gardening gloves hit the ground as I rushed toward the house. Of course. Are you hurt? Are the kids okay? Just. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Please, Mom. I don't know what else to do. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion and growing panic. In 34 years of being Derek's mother, I'd never heard him sound like that. Not when he'd broken his arm falling from his bike. Not when his high school girlfriend broke up with him before prom. Not even when Frank died. This was the sound of a man drowning. I paced my living room for exactly 9 minutes before Derek's blue Honda pulled into my driveway with unusual speed. Through the window, I watched him sit motionless behind the wheel for nearly a minute before getting out. Even from a distance, I could see his shoulders shaking. When he finally reached my front door, the man standing there barely resembled my son. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his button-down shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. Derek, honey, come in. I wrapped him in my arms, feeling how thin he'd become. Tell me what's happening. He collapsed onto my sofa, the same one where he'd recovered from childhood illnesses, where we'd watched countless movies together. For a moment, he just stared at his hands, struggling to compose himself. Mom, we're going to lose everything, he finally whispered. Sienna's business, it failed. Completely. We're in debt so deep I can't even. I don't know how to tell Lily and Mason that we might be homeless. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd known small businesses could struggle, but Sienna's interior design work had seemed successful. She'd shown me photos of beautiful rooms she'd designed, talked about satisfied clients and repeat customers. How much debt are we talking about? I asked gently, settling beside him on the couch. Derek's face crumpled. $180,000. The number was so large I initially misheard it. 18,000? That's manageable, sweetheart. We can figure out. No, Mom. 180,000. Sienna made some terrible decisions with the business. Took out loans to expand, invested in inventory that never sold, trusted the wrong contractors who disappeared with deposits. She was trying to surprise me by growing the business, and instead. He covered his face with his hands. The house is already in foreclosure proceedings. The lawyers say we have maybe 2 weeks before we lose it. After that, I don't know where we'll go. Lily's in 8th grade, she's finally found her friend group, and now we might have to pull her out of school and move into some apartment in a different district. Mason doesn't understand why Mommy cries all the time. My heart shattered thinking about my grandchildren's confusion and fear. Lily, so bright and ambitious, dreaming of attending Ohio State like her parents. Mason, still young enough to believe parents could fix anything. Derek, surely there are options. Bankruptcy, debt consolidation, something. We've talked to 3 different financial advisors, Mom. Because of the business structure Sienna set up and the personal guarantees she signed, bankruptcy won't discharge most of the debt. And our credit is so destroyed now that no legitimate lender will work with us. He looked up at me with eyes so full of desperation I felt physically sick. You're the only person who can save us. I hate asking, I hate putting this on you, but I don't have anyone else to turn to. Of course I'll help, I said immediately. My savings account has about 30,000. It's not much, but... Mom, I need more than that. Derek's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I need you to mortgage the house. The words seemed to echo in my living room. Mortgage the house. The house Frank and I had worked for 43 years to pay off. The house that represented our entire life's work and my only significant asset. Derek, that's a huge step. If I mortgage the house and something goes wrong. Nothing will go wrong, he said quickly, suddenly animated with desperate energy. I'll pay you back. Every penny, with interest. My job is stable, my income is good. Once we get through this crisis and Sienna gets back on her feet, we can handle monthly payments to you. I promise, Mom. I swear on Dad's memory. The invocation of Frank's memory felt like a knife to my chest. Derek knew exactly what that meant to me, knew I would never take such a promise lightly. How much would you need? I heard myself asking. 180,000 to clear the debt and stop the foreclosure. I know it's everything, Mom. I know what I'm asking. But Lily and Mason. His voice broke again. They keep asking why we're looking at apartments, why Mommy talks about moving away from Grandma. I can't tell them we might end up in a shelter. The image of my grandchildren, my bright, beautiful grandchildren, in a homeless shelter was unbearable. I thought about my own childhood, the the fear and instability my parents had faced during hard times. The promise I'd made to myself that my family would never experience that kind of uncertainty. Let me think about it, I said carefully. This is a big decision. I need to understand all the implications. Derek nodded eagerly. Of course. Take your time. But Mom, please don't take too long. Every day we wait makes the situation worse. After he left, I sat in my empty house surrounded by 43 years of memories and tried to imagine losing it all. The kitchen where Frank had made me coffee every morning for 4 decades. The bedroom where we'd dreamed and planned our future. The dining room where we'd celebrated every milestone in Derek's life. But then I thought about Lily's bright smile and Mason's infectious laugh. I thought about Derek's desperate tears and the weight of being the only person who could save my family. That night, I called my neighbor Eleanor Patterson, whose husband had worked in banking for 30 years. Over coffee the next morning, I asked her opinion about mortgaging a paid-off house to help family. Marge, that's an enormous risk at our age, Eleanor said gently. What if something happens to your income? What if Derek can't pay you back as quickly as he hopes? You could lose everything. But if I don't help, they'll definitely lose everything, I replied. Including their children's stability. Eleanor studied my face carefully. Have you seen the foreclosure papers? The debt documentation? Sometimes people's perception of their situation isn't entirely accurate. I hadn't asked for documentation. Derek was my son. His word had always been enough. I trust Derek, I said firmly. He's never lied to me about anything serious. I'm sure he hasn't, Eleanor agreed. But maybe ask to see the paperwork anyway. Not because you don't trust him, but because you need to understand exactly what you're getting into. That afternoon, I called Derek and asked if he could bring copies of the relevant documents for my review. Not because I doubted him, I explained, but because my friend had suggested I understand all the details before making such a major decision. Of course, Mom. I should have brought them in the first place. Sienna has everything organized in a file. We'll bring it all over tonight. Derek and Sienna arrived after dinner, arms full of folders and manila envelopes. Sienna, who had been notably absent during Derek's initial breakdown, now seemed poised and professional. She spread documents across my dining room table with the efficiency of someone accustomed to business presentations. Marge, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're even considering this, she said, her voice warm with what seemed like genuine emotion. I feel terrible that my mistakes have put the family in this position. I was trying to build something special, and instead I've risked everything we have. The paperwork looked official and overwhelming. Bank statements showing alarming negative balances. Letters from creditors demanding immediate payment. Legal documents from the mortgage company initiating foreclosure proceedings. Most damning of all, a business financial statement showing Sienna's interior design company hemorrhaging money for months. I don't understand business finances very well, I admitted, scanning columns of numbers that might as well have been written in a foreign language. It's simple, Sienna explained patiently. I made several bad decisions in rapid succession. Invested heavily in a furniture line that didn't sell. Hired contractors for large projects who disappeared with the deposits. Signed personal guarantees on business loans thinking the income would cover them. She pulled out a thick document marked Personal Financial Statement and pointed to a line near the bottom. See this? This is our total debt. And here, she indicated another line, is our monthly income. There's no way to cover the gap without help. Derek sat silent through most of Sienna's explanation, occasionally nodding or adding brief confirmations. He looked exhausted, defeated in a way that broke my heart. What about bankruptcy? I asked, remembering my conversation with Eleanor. We consulted with 3 different attorneys, Sienna replied. Because of the personal guarantees I signed and the way the business was structured, Chapter 7 bankruptcy wouldn't discharge most of the debt. Chapter 13 would require a payment plan we simply can't afford given our income. She pulled out more documents, consultation notes from bankruptcy attorneys, all seeming to confirm her explanation. Marge, I know this is an enormous request, Derek finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. If there was any other way, I would never ask this of you. But I've exhausted every option. You're our last hope. Looking at my son's face, the same face that had looked up at me with complete trust throughout his childhood, I felt my resistance crumbling. This was my baby, my only child, asking for help in his darkest hour. If I do this, I said slowly, how would the repayment work? Derek and Sienna exchanged a quick glance. We could pay you $1,000 a month starting immediately, Derek said. Once Sienna gets back on her feet professionally and we've stabilized, we could increase that to $1,500 or even $2,000 monthly. At that rate, it would take. I tried to calculate in my head. About 8 to 10 years, Sienna finished. I know that seems like a long time, but Derek's income is stable and growing. And I'm already working on rebuilding my client base. We'll get through this, Marge. And we'll take care of you in the process. That phrase, we'll take care of you, resonated deeply. Since Frank's death, I'd been fiercely independent, perhaps to a fault. But the idea of having that safety net, of knowing Derek and Sienna were looking out for me financially, was appealing. I need a day to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Derek agreed quickly. This is huge, Mom. I understand you need time. As they gathered their papers, Sienna approached me with what seemed like heartfelt emotion. Marge, I want you to know that if you do this, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. You would be saving not just our house, but our family's future. Lily and Mason's future. That night, I lay awake thinking about Frank and what he would have wanted me to do. Frank, who had worked 2 jobs to help Derek through college. Frank, who had always said family comes first, no matter what. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Derek at 7 a.m., knowing he'd be awake getting ready for work. I'll do it, I said without preamble. I'll mortgage the house. The relief in his voice was overwhelming. Mom, thank you. Thank you so much. You're saving us. When can we start the process? I asked, already feeling the weight of my decision settling on my shoulders. Today, if you want. I can take a personal day and we can go to the bank together. Sienna's already researched several lenders and found one with good terms for situations like ours. Something about that phrasing bothered me, situations like ours, but I pushed the feeling aside. Of course they would have researched options. They were facing foreclosure, naturally they'd explore every possibility. We met at First National Bank of Riverside at 10 a.m. Derek looked more like himself than he had in days, though I noticed he seemed nervous as we approached the building. Sienna joined us, carrying a leather portfolio that made her look every inch the successful businesswoman she'd once been. The loan officer, a pleasant woman named Jennifer Walsh who looked barely old enough to have finished college, walked us through the application process. I'd expected it to be complicated, but Sienna had come prepared with every document imaginable. Mrs. Caldwell, you have excellent credit and significant equity in your property, Jennifer observed, reviewing my financial information. However, I have to ask, this is a substantial loan for someone in retirement. Are you certain you're comfortable with the monthly payment obligations? The monthly payment would be $1,247, eating up nearly half of my fixed income. Without Derek's promised payments, I'd be in serious financial trouble within months. My son will be making the payments, I explained. This loan is essentially helping him through a temporary crisis. Jennifer's expression grew carefully neutral. I understand. However, legally speaking, the loan will be in your name only. The bank's recourse for payment would be against you and your property exclusively. Of course, Derek interjected smoothly. But Mom, you know I'll never let you make those payments yourself. This is my responsibility. Jennifer spent considerable time explaining the terms and risks. How a mortgage at my age could affect my estate planning. What would happen if I became unable to make payments due to illness or death? The foreclosure process if payments fell behind. I appreciate your thoroughness, I told her, but I understand the risks. My son is reliable and financially stable. This situation is temporary. As we signed what felt like endless paperwork, I noticed Derek and Sienna whispering quietly in the corner of the office. When I finished with my signatures, they both seemed unusually energetic, almost giddy with relief. The funds will be available by tomorrow afternoon, Jennifer informed us. Mrs. Caldwell, I'll need you to come in personally to authorize the wire transfer to your son's accounts. Actually, Sienna spoke up, would it be possible to split the transfer? We need to pay several different creditors directly to stop various legal proceedings. She handed Jennifer a typed list with account numbers and amounts. Everything looked official and professional, though I was surprised by the number of different entities requiring payment. This can certainly be arranged, Jennifer agreed. We'll need Mrs. Caldwell's authorization for each transfer. That night, I called Eleanor to let her know what I'd decided. I hope it works out the way Derek promises, she said carefully. You're a good mother, Marge. Just make sure you protect yourself too. What do you mean? Maybe have Derek sign something acknowledging the debt to you? Something that documents his promise to make the payments? I hadn't thought about formal documentation beyond Derek's word. Do you think that's necessary? Probably not, Eleanor said quickly. Derek's a good man. But sometimes having things in writing just makes everyone feel more secure. When I mentioned this to Derek the next morning, he seemed slightly offended. Mom, you don't trust me? Of course I trust you. It's just that my friend suggested. It's fine, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. If you want something in writing, I'll draft something up. But honestly, Mom, we're family. Your word has always been good enough for me. The guilt was immediate and sharp. Here I was, doubting my son's integrity when he was already devastated by his financial situation. You're right, I said quickly. I'm sorry. We don't need anything formal between us. Thank you for understanding. I know this is stressful for everyone. The money transfer happened without incident the following afternoon. Sitting in Jennifer Walsh's office, I authorized $180,000 to be distributed among 7 different accounts according to Sienna's detailed list. Watching that much money that represented my entire financial security, disappear with a few keystrokes was surreal. It's done, Jennifer confirmed. The funds have been transferred successfully. Derek hugged me tightly. Mom, I will never forget this. Never. You saved our family today. Sienna was more reserved but seemed genuinely emotional. Marge, I promise you'll never regret trusting us. That evening, Derek called to confirm that all the transfers had been received and various legal proceedings halted. The foreclosure is officially stopped, he reported. Sienna's business creditors have been paid. We're free and clear, Mom. Now we can focus on rebuilding. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. I'd done the right thing. My family was safe. But over the next few days, subtle changes began to emerge that made me increasingly uneasy. Derek's daily check-in calls became less frequent. When I asked about the rebuilding process, his answers were vague. Sienna, who had been so grateful and communicative during the crisis, seemed to disappear entirely. Most troubling of all, the Sunday family dinners stopped. Just for a few weeks, Derek explained when I asked. We need time to decompress and figure out our next steps. This whole situation has been traumatic for the kids. I understood trauma, but family dinner had always been our constant. Even during Frank's illness and death, even during Derek's teenage years when he'd rather have been anywhere else, Sunday dinner at Grandma's house had never been cancelled. 2 weeks after the money transfer, I drove past Derek and Sienna's house on my way to the grocery store. Instead of the "for sale" or foreclosure signs I'd expected to see removed, there was a new sign in the front yard: sold. My hands shook as I pulled over to read it more carefully. Not only was the house sold, but according to the realtor information, it had sold for $340,000, significantly more than Derek had ever mentioned the house being worth. Confused and increasingly alarmed, I called Derek immediately. "Oh, that," he said when I asked about the sale. "We decided it made more sense to sell and downsize rather than try to stay in a house with so many bad memories attached. We'll be able to bank some of the equity and start fresh." "Where are you moving?" "We're still looking. Probably renting for a while until we figure out exactly what we want." Something about his tone felt off, but I couldn't identify exactly what. "When do you close on the sale?" "Already closed. The buyers needed to move quickly, so we expedited everything." "That's wonderful news," I said, though a strange anxiety was building in my chest. "What does this mean for your payments to me?" A long pause. "We'll talk about that soon, Mom. There are some complications with the sale proceeds that Sienna's accountant needs to sort out first." "Complications?" "Just tax stuff. Nothing serious. We'll have everything figured out by next month." But next month never came. I woke up on Monday morning, October 18th, to an unusual silence. Living alone for 2 years had made me sensitive to the rhythms of my neighborhood: Mrs. Patterson starting her car at 7:15 for her commute, the school bus rumbling past at 7:45, the mail truck arriving precisely at 11:30. But this silence was different. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't identify until I realized what was missing. I hadn't heard from Derek in 4 days. 4 days without a phone call, text message, or surprise visit was unprecedented since Frank's death. Derek had checked on me so consistently that his silence felt like a physical absence. I called his cell phone. It went directly to voicemail without ringing. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. Just checking in. Call me when you get this." I tried Sienna's number with the same result. Straight to voicemail, no ring. A growing unease settling in my stomach, I decided to drive by their house. Maybe Derek had mentioned something about a family trip and I'd forgotten. Maybe they were dealing with moving logistics and too busy to call. But when I turned onto their street, what I saw made me pull over and sit in stunned confusion. The house was empty. Completely, obviously empty. The windows that should have shown signs of life, lamps, furniture, family photos, were bare. The driveway where Derek's Honda and Sienna's SUV should have been parked was vacant. Even the decorative planters Sienna had arranged on the front porch were gone. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They'd sold the house, yes, but Derek had said they were still looking for a new place. Had they moved so quickly? Without telling me where? My hands trembling, I called Derek's number again. Still voicemail. This time I left a different message. "Derek, I'm at your house and it's empty. I'm worried about you and the kids. Please call me immediately." I drove home in a daze and spent the rest of the day calling every number I could think of. Derek's work, Sienna's few local friends, even Lily's school. Derek's office told me he'd taken a leave of absence for family reasons, starting the previous Friday. Lily and Mason had been withdrawn from school the same day, with records transferred to an out-of-state institution to be determined later. Out of state? Derek hadn't mentioned anything about moving out of state. By evening, panic had fully set in. I called the police to report my missing family, only to be told that adults have the right to relocate without informing relatives. Unless there were signs of foul play or child endangerment, there was nothing law enforcement could do. But it's not like them to disappear without telling me, I insisted to the board-sounding officer who took my report. Ma'am, family dynamics change. Sometimes people need space. Give it a few more days. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking my phone, certain Derek would call with a reasonable explanation. Equipment problems with both phones. A sudden family emergency requiring immediate travel. Some logical reason why my son and grandchildren had vanished without a word. Tuesday brought no calls, but it did bring something else, a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Jennifer Walsh from First National Bank. Could you please call me at your earliest convenience regarding your recent mortgage? There's been an irregularity I need to discuss with you. An irregularity. The word sent ice through my veins. I called Jennifer immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for calling back. I need to ask you some questions about the payments your son was supposed to be making on your mortgage. Our records show that your first payment is due in 3 days, and we haven't received any indication of how it will be handled. Derek said he would set up automatic payments from his account, I replied, though I realized he'd never actually shown me any such arrangement. I see. Do you have his current banking information? Because the account numbers he provided for the original transfers are showing as closed. Closed. What do you mean, closed? The accounts where we sent the loan funds last month have been closed by the account holders. When I tried to contact your son at the numbers he provided, both phones appear to be disconnected. The room started spinning. Disconnected? Mrs. Caldwell, I think you need to come in so we can discuss this situation in person. Can you be here this afternoon? I was there within the hour. Jennifer's expression was carefully professional, but I could see concern in her eyes as she spread documents across her desk. Mrs. Caldwell, I've been in banking for 8 years, and I've seen situations like this before. I'm afraid you may have been the victim of fraud. The word, fraud, didn't compute. Fraud? By who? Potentially by your son and daughter-in-law. The pattern of behavior, requesting large sums for crisis situations, providing documentation that appears legitimate but can't be verified, then disappearing immediately after receiving funds, it's unfortunately common in cases of elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. The phrase made me feel ancient and foolish. But Derek is my son. He wouldn't. Mrs. Caldwell, I need to ask you directly, have you been able to reach Derek or Sienna since the loan funds were transferred? No, but... Have you seen any of the creditors or legal documents they provided? I realized I hadn't. Everything had been presented to me as copies, never originals. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to give you the number for our fraud investigation department. I'm also going to recommend that you contact an attorney who specializes in elder law. This situation needs professional attention immediately. I left the bank in a fog of disbelief and growing terror. My son, my baby boy who I'd raised to value honesty and family above everything, had potentially stolen my life savings and disappeared. That evening, I forced myself to go through the documents Derek and Sienna had shown me, this time with a more critical eye. Business financial statements that looked professional but bore no official letterhead. Bank statements that could easily have been fabricated. Legal documents that contained no attorney contact information or bar numbers. How had I been so blind? So trusting? The answer was simple and devastating, because I loved them. Because Derek was my son and I'd believed family would never deliberately harm family. I called Eleanor Patterson, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. Oh, honey, she said gently. Come over. Right now. You shouldn't be alone. Eleanor held me while I cried and helped me make a list of people to contact. The police, again, with new information about potential fraud. An attorney specializing in elder abuse. A private investigator who might be able to track down Derek and Sienna's whereabouts. We're going to figure this out, Eleanor promised. We're going to get your money back, and we're going to make sure Derek faces consequences for what he's done. But as I sat in her kitchen at midnight, drinking tea and trying to accept the reality of my situation, I realized the money was only part of what I'd lost. I'd lost my son. I'd lost my grandchildren. I'd lost my faith in my own judgment and my understanding of what family meant. Most immediately, I'd potentially lost my house. Without Derek's promised payments, I couldn't afford the mortgage I'd taken out to save him. The savings account I might have dipped into to cover a few months of payments was gone, given to the very person who had now abandoned me. In trying to save my family's home, I'd doomed my own. But as devastating as those realizations were, what I felt most acutely was rage. Pure, white-hot rage at being manipulated by people I'd loved unconditionally. Derek and Sienna thought they'd gotten away with the perfect crime, stealing from an elderly woman who loved them too much to question their motives. They had no idea what they'd awakened in me. I didn't sleep for 3 days after the truth hit me. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by every document Derek and Sienna had ever given me, determined to understand exactly how they'd orchestrated my financial destruction. The private investigator Eleanor helped me find was a former police detective named Marcus Chen who specialized in financial fraud cases. When he walked into my living room that Thursday morning, I expected someone older, more formal. Instead, Marcus was probably in his early 40s, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, with kind eyes that reminded me of Derek before everything. Mrs. Caldwell, I know this is devastating, he said as we settled in my living room with coffee. But I want you to know that cases like this often have better outcomes than people expect. The key is acting quickly, and you've done that. He spread a laptop computer and legal pad on my coffee table. Tell me everything, starting from the beginning. Don't leave out any detail, no matter how small. For 2 hours, I recounted every conversation, every document, every red flag I'd ignored. Marcus took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional information. The speed of everything is the first major red flag, he observed. Legitimate financial crises develop over time, with multiple opportunities for intervention. When someone presents you with a crisis that requires immediate action with no time for verification, that's usually intentional pressure to prevent scrutiny. He pulled up something on his laptop. I ran a preliminary background check on Derek and Sienna before coming here. Mrs. Caldwell, there are no foreclosure proceedings against their home in any Ohio County records. There never were. The betrayal hit me anew. None of it was real. It appears not. Moreover, Sienna's business, Meridian Interior Design, was dissolved voluntarily 6 months ago. Not because of debt or failure, but through standard business dissolution procedures. Dissolved? Closed down properly, all debts paid, all legal requirements met. In fact, based on the tax records I can access, the business was modestly profitable when it closed. I felt sick. So the debt crisis appears to have been entirely fabricated. Marcus pulled up more documents on his screen. Here's where it gets interesting. 3 weeks before Derek's first call to you about the crisis, Sienna purchased 2 one-way airline tickets to Lisbon, Portugal. Portugal. The word echoed in my mind. They planned this, I whispered. It certainly appears that way. Portugal is interesting because it has favorable banking laws for foreign nationals and doesn't have extradition treaties with the United States for many financial crimes. The scope of their betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't a desperate decision made in crisis. This was a calculated, long-term plan to steal my money and disappear. Marcus, what are my options? Several, actually. First, we report this to the FBI. Wire fraud across state lines, especially elder financial abuse, is a federal crime. Second, we work with international authorities to freeze any assets they may have transferred overseas. Third, we explore civil remedies to recover your losses. What are the chances I'll get my money back? Marcus's expression grew serious. That depends on how much they've spent and how well they've hidden what remains. But Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to understand something important. People who commit this type of fraud often make critical mistakes. They're usually not as smart as they think they are. Over the next week, Marcus uncovered details that painted a devastating picture of premeditation and deception. Derek and Sienna had been planning their departure for at least 8 months. In addition to the airline tickets, they'd obtained new passports, opened foreign bank accounts, and researched Portuguese residency requirements for Americans with liquid assets. The documents they'd shown me were sophisticated forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. The business financial statements used a template downloaded from the internet. The foreclosure documents contained legal language copied from legitimate court filings but with their information substituted. Most damaging of all, Marcus discovered that Derek had been systematically gathering information about my finances for over a year. Bank statements found in his home office, abandoned in their hurried departure, showed detailed notes about my savings account balances, the value of my home, and my monthly expenses. This was a long-term operation, Marcus explained during our second meeting. They studied your financial situation, identified your vulnerabilities, your love for your grandchildren, your trust in family, and crafted a scenario designed to exploit both. The FBI agent assigned to my case, Special Agent Patricia Vance, was a woman about Derek's age with silver hair and a direct manner that I found both intimidating and reassuring. Mrs. Caldwell, I want to be honest with you about what we're dealing with, she said during our first meeting. Your son and daughter-in-law committed multiple federal crimes, wire fraud, elder abuse, and potentially money laundering. However, because they've fled the country, prosecution becomes more complicated. But you can get them back. Portugal doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States for financial crimes under $500,000. However, they do cooperate with American law enforcement in cases involving elder abuse and fraud with aggravating circumstances. Agent Vance explained that the international aspect of the case actually worked in our favor in some ways. Moving large amounts of money across international borders triggers automatic reporting requirements, and Derek and Sienna had been sloppy about concealing their trail. They transferred most of your money to a Portuguese bank within 48 hours of receiving it, she reported. But they didn't properly declare the funds to Portuguese authorities, which violates that country's anti-money laundering laws. Within 2 weeks of opening the investigation, Agent Vance called with promising news. Portuguese authorities have frozen the bank accounts associated with your son and daughter-in-law. They're treating this as a potential money laundering case, which gives them broad authority to hold assets pending investigation. Does that mean I'll get my money back? It's a significant step in that direction. Portuguese law allows for asset forfeiture in cases where funds are determined to be proceeds of international fraud. But the best news came 3 weeks later, when Marcus called with barely contained excitement. Mrs. Caldwell, Derek made a critical mistake. He's been using his cell phone, and Portuguese telecom companies cooperate with international law enforcement. We know exactly where they are. They were living in a rented villa outside Cascais, a coastal town near Lisbon popular with expatriates. Derek had been using Portuguese ATMs with American bank cards, creating a digital trail that led directly to their location. Portuguese police conducted surveillance yesterday, Marcus reported. Derek, Sienna, and both children are confirmed to be at the address. They appear to be living quite comfortably on your money. The rage I felt hearing about their comfortable lifestyle was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. While I was lying awake nights worrying about losing my house, they were enjoying oceanfront views purchased with my life savings. What happens next? Agent Vance is coordinating with Portuguese authorities to execute arrest warrants. Portugal takes elder abuse very seriously, especially when it involves their banking system. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning while I was volunteering at the library. Agent Vance called me during my lunch break. Mrs. Caldwell, Derek and Sienna Morgan are in custody in Portugal. The Portuguese authorities have charged them with money laundering and fraud. They'll remain in detention while the investigation continues. I had to sit down. After 6 weeks of uncertainty and investigation, my son and daughter-in-law were finally facing consequences. What about Lily and Mason? The children are safe. Portuguese Child Services has placed them with an American expatriate family while arrangements are made for their long-term care. My grandchildren. My innocent grandchildren, whose parents' greed had destroyed their stability and safety. Can I talk to them? Not yet. But Mrs. Caldwell, there may be an opportunity for you to regain custody once this legal situation is resolved. That night, I called Eleanor with the news. I'm proud of you, Marge, she said. You didn't just roll over and accept what they did to you. You fought back. But as satisfying as Derek and Sienna's arrest was, I wasn't finished fighting. I wanted more than just their capture. I wanted justice, accountability, and, most importantly, my money back so I could afford to take care of my grandchildren if the opportunity arose. The real battle was just beginning. 3 months after Derek and Sienna's arrest in Portugal, I received a call that changed everything. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Agent Vance. I have news about your case, and I think you're going to want to sit down. I was already sitting in my kitchen, going through bills and trying to figure out how to make another mortgage payment without Derek's promised help. Portuguese authorities have completed their investigation, Agent Vance continued. Derek and Sienna have agreed to cooperate with both Portuguese and American prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. What does that mean, exactly? It means they're providing information about how they planned and executed the fraud, and they're agreeing to full asset forfeiture to pay restitution. Mrs. Caldwell, we're going to recover most of your money. I felt dizzy with relief. Most of it? They spent approximately $30,000 on living expenses and travel, but the remaining $150,000 has been frozen in Portuguese banks. Those funds will be returned to you once the legal proceedings are complete. $150,000. Not everything, but enough to pay off the mortgage and restore most of my financial security. There's something else, Agent Vance continued. Derek has requested permission to call you. He wants to speak with you before sentencing. The idea of hearing Derek's voice again filled me with conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, but also, despite everything, a mother's love that I couldn't entirely extinguish. I need to think about that. Of course. But Mrs. Caldwell, if you do decide to speak with him, the call will be recorded and monitored. Anything he says could be used in legal proceedings. That evening, I sat in Frank's chair and tried to imagine what Derek might say to me. Would he apologize? Would he try to justify what he'd done? Would he blame Sienna and claim to be another victim? I decided I needed to hear him out, if only to get answers to questions that had haunted me for months. The call came 2 days later. When I heard Derek's voice say, "Mom," I started crying before I could stop myself. Derek. It was all I could manage. Mom, I know you probably hate me. I know you have every right to hate me. But I need you to hear me out. His voice sounded different. Older, strained, defeated in a way that went beyond physical imprisonment. I'm listening. First, I need you to know that this was never about not loving you. I do love you, Mom. I've always loved you. You have a strange way of showing love. I know. I know how this looks, how it feels from your perspective. But Mom, it wasn't supposed to happen this way. How was it supposed to happen, Derek? When exactly was stealing my life savings supposed to feel acceptable? A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. We were supposed to pay you back. That was always the plan. Sienna had researched some investment opportunities in Portugal, and we were going to double the money and return everything to you with interest. Investment opportunities. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. I know how that sounds now. I know how stupid it all seems. But Mom, we thought we were going to make you rich, not rob you blind. And the fake foreclosure? The fabricated business debt? The forged documents? That was Sienna's idea. She said you'd never agree to let us borrow that much money for investments, but you would do anything to save the grandchildren. Even now, even from a Portuguese jail cell, Derek was deflecting responsibility onto his wife. Derek, you're 44 years old. Nobody forced you to lie to me for months. You're right. You're absolutely right. I could have said no at any point. I could have told you the truth. I could have found another way. Why didn't you? Another long pause. Because I'm weak, Mom. Because I've always taken the easy path, and the easiest path was letting you solve my problems. Even when it meant destroying your life. This admission, raw and honest in a way Derek had never been, broke something open in my chest. Derek, I would have helped you if you'd asked honestly. If you'd said you wanted to try some investments, if you'd asked to borrow money legitimately, I would have considered it. I know. That's what makes this so much worse. You would have said yes because you love me, and instead I chose to lie because I'm a coward. What about Lily and Mason? Did you think about what this would do to them? Derek's voice cracked. I thought about them constantly. I told myself we were securing their future. I told myself that once the investments paid off, they'd have college funds and family wealth they never would have had otherwise. And now? Now they're in foster care in a foreign country because their father is a criminal. Now they'll grow up knowing their dad stole from their grandmother and abandoned them. Now their futures are destroyed because of my greed. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Derek told me about the months of planning, about Sienna's research into Portuguese banking laws, about his gradual acceptance of increasingly dishonest steps in their scheme. When did you decide to go through with it? I asked. The night after we showed you all the fake documents. Sienna said it was too late to back out, that we'd already committed fraud by showing you forged papers. She said we had to follow through or risk prison for attempting fraud with no benefit. So you chose to complete the fraud instead. I chose the path that seemed to offer the most hope of success. I was wrong about everything, Mom. Wrong about the investments, wrong about our ability to pay you back, wrong about the kind of person I am. As the call neared its end, Derek asked the question I'd been dreading. Mom, will you ever be able to forgive me? I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where Derek had eaten countless meals, where he'd told me about his first girlfriend and his college aspirations and his dreams of becoming a father. The same kitchen where he'd sobbed while begging me to save his family. I don't know, Derek. I honestly don't know. Will you consider taking custody of Lily and Mason when this is all over? They need family, and despite everything I've done, you're the best family they have. The question I'd been hoping he would ask and dreading he would ask. I'll consider it. But Derek, if I do take the children, it will be because I love them, not because I've forgiven you. I understand. That's more than I deserve. After we hung up, I sat in my empty house and cried for hours. Not just for myself and what I'd lost, but for Derek and the man I'd thought he was. For Lily and Mason and their shattered childhood. For the family that had been destroyed by greed and deception. 2 weeks later, Agent Vance called with the final legal resolution. Derek had been sentenced to 5 years in Portuguese prison, with the possibility of serving the remainder of his sentence in American custody after 2 years. Sienna received 3 years, with similar transfer options. All assets, including the money they'd stolen from me, would be returned within 60 days. Most importantly, both children would be returned to the United States, and I would be given the opportunity to petition for guardianship. Mrs. Caldwell, there's one more thing, Agent Vance said. Derek asked me to give you a message. What message? He said to tell you that he hopes someday you can remember the son he used to be, not just the man he became. 6 months later, I stood in the arrivals area of Columbus International Airport, holding a sign with Lily and Mason Morgan written in my best teacher handwriting. My hands shook with nervousness and anticipation as passengers from the Philadelphia connecting flight began emerging from the security checkpoint. I recognized them immediately, though both had grown in the 9 months since I'd last seen them. Lily, now 14, looked older than her years, carrying herself with a wariness that broke my heart. Mason, still 10 but taller and more serious than the energetic boy I remembered, held tightly to his sister's hand. When they spotted me, their reactions were different. Lily's face crumpled with relief and she ran toward me, while Mason hung back, uncertain and possibly afraid. Grandma Marge, Lily sobbed into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about what Mom and Dad did to you. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, holding her tight. None of this is your fault. None of it. Mason approached more slowly, and when I knelt to his level, he looked at me with Derek's eyes and asked, Are you mad at us? Never, I said firmly. I could never be mad at you. I love you both more than you'll ever know. The ride home was quiet. Both children seemed overwhelmed by being back in Ohio, back in the world they'd known before their parents' choices turned everything upside down. As we drove through Riverside, Mason pointed out familiar landmarks, the school he'd attended, the park where I'd taken them last summer, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated his birthday. Will we go back to our old school? Lily asked tentatively. If you want to, I replied. We'll figure out what works best for both of you. At home, I showed them to their new rooms. I'd spent weeks preparing spaces for them, trying to balance making them feel welcome with not overwhelming them. Lily's room was decorated in the soft blues and greens she'd always loved, with a new desk for homework and shelves for the books I hoped she'd still enjoy reading. Mason's room featured the dinosaur theme he'd been obsessed with before the world fell apart. This is really nice, Grandma, Lily said, running her hand over the quilt I'd chosen for her bed. Thank you. That first evening, as we ate dinner in the kitchen where their father had once begged me to save his family, Lily asked the question I'd been expecting. Grandma, do you hate our parents? I'd thought about this question constantly while preparing for their arrival. How do you explain to children that their parents, whom they still love despite everything, had committed crimes against someone else they love? I'm very hurt by what they did, I said carefully. And I'm angry about the choices they made. But hate is too strong a word for people I once loved very much. Do you think they're bad people? Mason asked quietly. I think they're people who made very bad choices. But that doesn't erase all the good things about them or all the ways they loved you. Over the following weeks, we developed new routines. Lily threw herself into 8th grade with determination that reminded me of myself at that age. She'd lost nearly a year of education during the chaos in Portugal, but her teachers were understanding and helpful in getting her caught up. Mason struggled more. He'd been pulled out of school in the middle of 3rd grade, and the disruption had affected his confidence and academic progress. We worked with tutors and counselors to help him readjust, but progress was slow. Both children attended therapy sessions to help them process the trauma of their parents' arrest and imprisonment. I attended family counseling sessions with them, learning how to support children dealing with parental incarceration and family shame. They blamed themselves, their therapist, Dr. Rebecca Santos, explained after one particularly difficult session. Children often feel responsible for their parents' choices, especially when those choices have devastating consequences. How do I help them understand it's not their fault? Keep saying it. Keep showing them through your actions that your love for them is unconditional. And be patient. Healing from this kind of trauma takes time. 3 months after the children moved in with me, we received our first letter from Derek. The return address showed a Portuguese correctional facility, and both children stared at the envelope for a long time before Lily asked if she could read it privately. She emerged from her room an hour later, eyes red from crying, and handed me the letter. "He says he's sorry," she reported. "He says he knows he messed up everything and he doesn't expect us to forgive him, but he wants us to know he loves us." How does that make you feel? Confused. Mad, sad. She sat heavily on the couch. "I still love him, Grandma. Even though I know what he did was terrible, he's still my dad." "Of course you love him. That's normal and healthy. You can love someone and still be angry about their choices." Mason chose not to read Derek's letter, asking me to keep it for him in case he wanted to see it later. "I'm not ready to hear from him yet," he said with a maturity that was heartbreaking in a 10-year-old. The money recovery process had been surprisingly straightforward. By Christmas, the Portuguese authorities had returned $147,000 of the original $180,000. I used most of it to pay off the mortgage, restored my savings account, and set aside college funds for both children. But more than financial recovery, I focused on emotional healing, for all of us. Eleanor Patterson became like a second grandmother to Lily and Mason, hosting them for Saturday afternoons when I needed time alone or wanted to attend my own therapy sessions. "Those children are lucky to have you," she told me one afternoon as we watched them play in her backyard. "But you're lucky to have them too. They're giving you purpose and joy in ways that money never could." She was right. Despite the pain and complexity of our situation, having Lily and Mason in my home had brought life and energy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Their laughter, their questions, their gradual return to childhood normalcy, all of it reminded me that family isn't just about shared genetics. It's about shared commitment to love and care for each other. By spring, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Lily was thriving academically and had made several close friends who didn't seem bothered by her unusual family situation. Mason's academic confidence was improving, and he'd started playing soccer again, something he'd loved before the crisis began. But the biggest test came in June, when we received notification that Derek and Sienna were eligible for supervised video calls with the children. Both Lily and Mason had mixed reactions to the opportunity. "I want to see Dad," Lily said. "But I'm scared I'll say something mean to him, and then I'll feel bad about it later." "I don't want to see Mom," Mason declared firmly. "She made Dad do bad things." Dr. Santos helped us prepare for the calls, discussing what the children might want to say and how to handle difficult emotions that might come up. The first call lasted only 10 minutes. Derek looked older, thinner, wearing what appeared to be a prison uniform. His joy at seeing the children was obvious, but so was his shame. "You both look so grown up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lily, your grandmother tells me you're doing really well in school." "Yeah, I like my new teachers." "Mason, buddy, I heard you're playing soccer again." "That's fantastic." Mason nodded but didn't speak. The conversation was stilted and painful, filled with long silences and careful avoidance of any mention of why Derek was calling from prison. After the call ended, both children were quiet and thoughtful. "He looks sad," Mason observed. "He should look sad," Lily replied with teenage directness. "What he did was wrong." "I know. But I still feel bad that he's sad." These conversations became regular parts of our lives. How to love someone who had hurt people you care about. How to maintain family connections while acknowledging serious wrongdoing. How to forgive without excusing harmful behavior. I found myself learning alongside the children, confronting my own complex feelings about Derek and what our relationship might look like in the future. 1 year after the children moved in with me, we received news that Derek would be transferred to a minimum security facility in Ohio to serve the remainder of his sentence. This meant the possibility of in-person visits, which brought both excitement and anxiety. Will you come with us if we visit him? Lily asked. If you want me to. I think I do. I want Dad to see that we're okay, that you're taking good care of us. Maybe then he won't worry so much. The first visit was scheduled for a Saturday morning in August. As we drove to the correctional facility, I thought about how much had changed since that devastating phone call nearly 2 years earlier. I'd lost my life savings, my sense of security, and my understanding of what family meant. But I'd also gained something precious, the opportunity to help 2 children heal from trauma while discovering my own resilience and capacity for growth. Derek was waiting for us in the visiting room, wearing civilian clothes and looking more like the son I remembered. When he saw Lily and Mason, his face lit up with joy and pain in equal measure. Look how tall you've gotten, he said, standing to hug them both. Mason, you're going to be taller than me soon. Grandma says I need to eat more vegetables, Mason replied, and Derek laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. During the visit, Derek asked about school, friends, favorite subjects, and weekend activities. He avoided any mention of his situation or what had led to it, focusing entirely on the children's lives and happiness. When visiting time was nearly over, Derek looked at me directly for the first time. Mom, thank you. Thank you for taking care of them, for giving them stability when I destroyed everything else. They're my grandchildren, I replied simply. I love them. I know. But you didn't have to forgive them for my mistakes. You could have been angry at all of us. Derek, I've learned something important this past year. Love isn't the same thing as trust, and forgiveness isn't the same thing as forgetting. I love these children completely, and I love the memory of who you used to be. But earning trust again, that's going to take time. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. And Mom? I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the second chance you've given my children. As we drove home, Lily was quiet for a long time before asking, Grandma, do you think Dad will be okay? I think your father is learning some important lessons about consequences and responsibility. Whether he'll be okay depends on what he does with those lessons. And will we be okay? I looked in the rearview mirror at my grandchildren, these 2 resilient, complicated, wonderful children who had become the center of my world. We're going to be more than okay, I said confidently. We're going to be family. I'm writing this story from my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in September. Lily, now 16, is upstairs video chatting with friends about a history project. Mason, 12, is in the backyard practicing soccer drills, preparing for his middle school tryouts next week. Derek was released from prison 3 months ago and moved into a halfway house in Columbus. He's found work at a construction company and attends AA meetings, even though alcohol wasn't part of his original problem. It's about accountability, he told me during one of our monthly supervised visits. About learning to make better choices every single day. Sienna was deported to her birth country, Canada, after serving her sentence. She sends cards to the children on birthdays and holidays, but has made no effort to rebuild a relationship with them. Lily occasionally expresses sadness about this, but Mason rarely mentions his mother anymore. The children have a standing invitation to visit Derek every other weekend, though they choose to go only about once a month. Their relationship with him is cordial but cautious, built on new foundations rather than the unconditional trust they once shared. Last month, Lily asked if she could start calling me Grandmom instead of Grandma Marge. It feels more permanent, she explained. Like we really belong here. You do really belong here, I assured her. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. The financial recovery was more complete than anyone expected. In addition to the returned money, Derek's work release wages are garnished to pay restitution for my legal costs and the children's therapy expenses. I've been able to rebuild my savings and even add to Lily and Mason's college funds. But the real healing has been emotional. The children are thriving academically and socially. Lily wants to study criminal justice in college, saying she wants to help other families affected by financial crimes. Mason is interested in marine biology and talks about studying ocean conservation. As for me, I've discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. I've testified before state legislative committees about elder financial abuse prevention. I volunteer with a support group for grandparents raising grandchildren. I've even started dating, something I never imagined I'd do again at 73. His name is Robert, he's a retired teacher, and he makes me laugh in ways I haven't laughed since Frank died. The children adore him, especially Mason, who needed a positive male role model. Do I regret answering Derek's phone call that September morning? Sometimes. But not because of the outcome, because of what it revealed about people I thought I knew completely. Derek recently asked if I'd consider letting him move back to Riverside when his parole period ends next year. Not to live with us, but to be closer to his children as they finish growing up. I want to prove that I can be the father they deserve, he said during our last visit. Even if it takes the rest of my life. I told him I'd consider it, depending on his continued progress and what the children want. But I also made clear that my primary commitment is to Lily and Mason's well-being, not to his redemption. Family, I've learned, isn't just about blood relations or shared history. It's about who shows up consistently, who can be trusted with your heart, and who chooses love over self-interest when it matters most. Derek failed that test catastrophically. But Lily and Mason pass it every day, just by being themselves, resilient, loving, and committed to building something good from the pieces of what was broken. Eleanor Patterson, who died peacefully last winter at age 89, left a note for me in her will. Marge, you turned the worst betrayal into the greatest gift. Those children are lucky to have you, but I think you're even luckier to have them. She was right. In trying to save Derek's family, I nearly lost everything. But in saving what remained, 2 children who needed love and stability, I found a purpose and joy I never expected in this stage of my life. Some people might call what happened to me a tragedy. I call it a transformation. If you're facing family betrayal, financial abuse, or the responsibility of raising children in impossible circumstances, I want you to know this: you're stronger than you think. You deserve better than you're getting, and sometimes the best revenge is building a life so good that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant to your happiness. Derek thought he could steal my security and disappear without consequences. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to be exactly the kind of family member he refused to be. And that, more than any money recovered or justice served, is the sweetest revenge of all. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting family members who betrayed you? How do you balance love and accountability when dealing with toxic family dynamics? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories about resilience, family complexity, and finding strength in impossible situations. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive choices, even when that someone is family.